Democratic Party is finding itself in a pretty strange place. Joe Biden, for example, is sinking in a lot of the polls, while Bernie Sanders takes his place. Well, that's fantastic. And now, unfortunately, due to that, there's a lot of establishment Democrats that are considering voting for a racist, sexist billionaire. No, I don't mean Donald Trump. They're not going to vote for Trump, but instead, former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg. So that's interesting, right? Now, for the establishment, Bloomberg is seen as both the answer to Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. And these new polls have seen Bloomberg rise significantly, especially with African Americans, which I find to be very strange. Now, a New Morning Consult poll had Bernie Sanders leading nationally with 29%, Biden second, 19%, but holy crap, here comes Bloomberg at 18%, Pete Buttigieg in fourth, but a strong fourth, at 11, and Warren, of course, running at the top five with 10%. So now Bloomberg, 18%, right up on Joe Biden's heels. Holy crap. So now what has happened? Well, the reason, of course, that Bloomberg is rising is because you can't shake a stick without seeing a Bloomberg ad. I expect to go outside and see a plane flying Bloomberg. Like, that's how bad it gets. Road signs, Bloomberg. I'm pretty sure my dash console is going to soon start playing Bloomberg ads. I wouldn't be surprised. That's how he spent about $400 million on ads. But hey, look, he's a billionaire, so that's barely pocket change for him, right? That money, of course, has allowed him to purchase endorsements from people like Washington, D.C. Mayor Muriel Bowser. So now Bloomberg has awarded her a share of a $70 million fund to support climate change initiatives in Washington, D.C. Not only that, but through his philanthropist organization, he has given $4 million in investments into DC schools from one of his, as I said, charities, right? Now you've got California Representative Harley Ruda, who also got $4.5 million for his political campaign from a Bloomberg Political Action Committee. So he is out there and has been spending millions upon millions of dollars on ads and buying people off at the local mayoral level. That's why he has now a lot of support from black mayors in cities where a lot of the people do not agree with that and have seen his record. And so, man, he's buying the election, or at least he's attempting to. He's trying to buy the Democratic nomination and maybe to buy the election itself. And so that's a big problem already. But it's just one of the many problems that surrounds Bloomberg that have caused progressives to speak out. Another more important thing was his record. Mainly his support of, up to recently, very recently in fact, his support of Stop-and-Frisk. Now, his support of Stop-and-Frisk has led progressive commentator Benjamin Dixon to find and release audio of Bloomberg speaking favorably about the program as recently as 2015, right? So he took that audio, we played this on the show, and, he cleaned it up, and it basically had him talking about how he loves Stop-and-Frisk and that the only way, because he said that the majority, like, if you want to stop gun violence, well, you go and shake down all the African-American kids, African-American, brown and black people. And if they don't have the gun on them, well, it's because they probably have their gun at home. Assuming that, or making the assumption, of course, that all black and brown people are violent gangbangers, right? And so that's Bloomberg. That's a huge, huge problem, right? So now Dixon, he encouraged people on social media using my Bloomberg story of basically telling people what it was like for a black and brown person to live under Mayor Bloomberg. Now, one of those stories came from Andrew J. Padilla, right? Who said, my friends and I, 17 to 18-year-old, were walking into Riverside Park next to Columbia University when we heard someone scream, "Hey!" I didn't turn around. Hey isn't my name. One of my less street smart friends did, thank God. It was a cop with his gun drawn at us. So, wait a minute. Stop and frisk gave these officers the ability to stop people who look suspicious using whatever means they want to, right? That's a problem. I mean, if you look at all suspicious, which is, by the way, super vague because it can basically mean, well, if you're somebody who's racist, well, look, you're super suspicious because you're black. So I'm going to stop you. I'm going to throw you up against a wall and I'm going to frisk you. And guess what? That's exactly what happened. And it happened disproportionately towards black and brown teenagers. Now, later on, Bloomberg had talked about that in another interview. And he said, some people will say that it disproportionately happens to black and brown people. I think it happens disproportionately too much to white people. That's stuff that he said. And it's not just black and brown people. You also had Muslims, which are also brown people. But Muslims were pointed out specifically by the NYPD. Momita Ahmed, founder of Millennials for Bernie, recounted her father getting stopped, detained, and held for hours in 2002 when she was just 12 years old. At the time, she had no idea what happened. So her father gets forcibly detained for no reason, right? And she's like, "Where's my dad? I don't know where he is." She started going to different hospitals to try to find out if he was dead. And by the way, she was only 12 that she ended up having to do this. Could you imagine? Well, if you look like me or Michael Bloomberg, then no, you'd never have to imagine this because this would never happen to us. But this is a reality of living under Michael Bloomberg if you're a black and brown person. So, and despite this, right, now you have Michael Bloomberg able to buy 22% of black support in the primary. More so than Bernie Sanders, who has a history of fighting for marginalized groups, including black and brown people. I mean, it's insane what money can do. And by the way, Bloomberg is, as I mentioned before, he's come out and said, well, look, I didn't mean that. Look, I completely disavow stop and frisk. In fact, when I was in office, I tried to stop and frisk. Now, that is a complete lie. In fact, the amount of stop and frisk that's used increased sevenfold under his tenure between 2002 and 2013. And it reached its peak in 2011 when more than 685,000 people were stopped. According to the New York Civil Liberties Union, about 90% of stopped frisked New Yorkers were found innocent. So that's the results of that, right? So many people that were forcibly stopped and frisked. And the vast majority of them had not done anything wrong. That's disastrous. Then, of course, you add on the 40 sexual harassment allegations against him. You also have Bloomberg being on record of being against the minimum wage. Now he says, oh, no, I'm in favor of a $15 minimum wage. Of course I am. But back in 2018, at the IMF, Bloomberg said this, quote, "The first thing to do is to get rid of impediments to job creation. For example, the U.S. has two things, one of which is brilliant and one of which is used all the time, but dysfunctional. Though we just don't think of it this way. We have minimum wages. A minimum wage means that the employer has to pay up to that level for their employees. So what would go through the employer's mind if they have to raise the amount of money they have to pay one of their employees? It is, can I do with fewer employees, but we don't want companies to cut back in the number of people they employ. What we should really be trying to do is convince them to employ more people. And in the interest of giving people a living wage, we're getting them to lose their jobs. Not everybody, but some." So right there, he was trying to basically point out how, we shouldn't do a living wage because that's going to lead to job losses. That is a Republican talking point. And guess what? It's a false one. It's not supported by the fact there's actually no correlation to less people working or less hours worked due to increases in the minimum wage. But then again, Michael Bloomberg is a Republican. And though in reality, though, I think it's more complicated than that. See, well, it's actually complicated but simple, right? Because we're trying to view this as, oh, he's a Republican, he's independent, he's a Democrat. What does he really believe? Michael Bloomberg believes in Michael Bloomberg. He's a chameleon. And that's what he is. Thinking about it, it's like, wait a minute. What does Michael Bloomberg do best? He helps Michael Bloomberg. and I understand, but wait, Jeff, he gives to so many different organizations. He gives to Moms Demand Action, and he's trying to do something about gun control. I mean, how could you say that Michael Bloomberg helps himself? Well, a lot of those charitable organizations, by the way, for one, again, Michael Bloomberg's richer than God. He's got $60 billion. And so he can afford to do that, to give basically what is akin to pennies to do something about gun control. And also, guess what? That's a tax write-off. I mean, sure, he can say, hey, look, I'm doing good things. And yes, maybe he does. But he can also write that off on his taxes as well. So I think there's some greed in there. But look, guy, he's a chameleon. He's a chameleon. He changes to whatever suits him. And all those blue no matter who people, Bernie's not a Democrat, which is garbage, right? Should be up in arms about Bloomberg. But instead of doing that and being that way, instead they're like, Michael Bloomberg. Yeah, maybe we should vote for him. It's ridiculous. Now, Dixon, by the way, he's got a quote here from the Guardian. He said, quote, about his money is saturating an image of him that doesn't match up with the experience people of New York have had with him. He has bought himself out of his true record. No, absolutely. Absolutely. 100% correct. Now, going back to Padilla here, he said, quote, it is supremely offensive to people of color to make them choose between two white supremacists. It's really offensive to working class people to choose between two billionaires. That's what a lot of the stories, by the way, are highlighting. It is offensive to even suggest that Bloomberg should be the Democratic nominee. Do I really have to choose between two racist oligarchs? That is a nightmare scenario. I mean, it's true. But see, there are so many people that are being blinded to his record. Or too many people that are simply pushing him because he's not Bernie. Joanne Reed, for example, told her audience, and by the way, this is a woman of color, right? That Bloomberg is best to take on a Republican because he basically is a Republican. Well, yeah, he was. He was. That wasn't a criticism, by the way. It was praise from a so-called progressive. There's no way in hell Americans should allow Bloomberg to buy his way into the White House. Which, by the way, I don't think it'd happen. He'd get destroyed by Donald Trump and would take the Democratic Party with him. If you actually care about winning, you will not vote in this primary for what is essentially the Democrats' Donald Trump. And if somehow he's able to buy his way into the nomination, then I don't know. I think a lot of you might agree with me that we just not vote for Bloomberg at all. Hey guys, hopefully you enjoyed that free video. Now I'm going to have to ask you a favor. Between the demonetization and the YouTube algorithm messing around with view counts, etc., we're having a hard time adjusting to the new YouTube reality, which is where you guys come in. See, we have a patreon.com/TYTNation set up to help us rely on you guys, the viewers, instead of big corporate ads. Look, you know the show. You know how I'm not in favor of big corporations anyway. So help us transition away from relying on the ad model to pay the bills and sign up to be a patron, patreon.com/TYTNation. That goes a long way to help us keep the lights on. And you guys will know that you're supporting independent progressive media.